Welcome to Like Minded with Dr. Patrice. Each episode, we'll be sitting down with different types of experts and unpacking the intersection of mental health, pop culture, and our day to day lives. My name is Dr. Patrice Lagoy. I'm an international psychologist, licensed marriage and family therapist, and former entertainment executive. This episode, we will be discussing inclusion and belonging in work culture. My guest today is Bianca Reed. She is the founder and principal consultant of Convey Culture. As a strategic marketing executive with over 15 years of experience, Bianca's superpower lies in finding the inflection point where multicultural marketing, social responsibility, and cultural fluency intersect. Welcome to Bianca. Thank you so much for being here. Since we are recording this in the few days after the election, I wanted to open with a question on a lot of people's minds. How to approach the workplace in this very politically divided environment when you are dealing with people who may have different points of view than you have. What are your thoughts about that, Bianca?
I think first, this election season politically is a little
Mm-hmm.
different than we've seen historically. So, first, I think acknowledging that some people are entering the workplace in a stage of grief. And I think
Yeah.
that's a lot different than just having differing viewpoints. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that veers more into your lane, but I do think acknowledging that people are entering into stages of grief. So, there's more rawness around political issues than we typically
Mm-hmm.
see when people just have a difference of opinion. One of the things that I think is going to be the greatest opportunity in the workplace is really leveling up emotional intelligence,
Mm.
approaching work and really thinking about how do I build that emotional intelligence muscle. And that really helps to one, improve self awareness. So, how are you coming to work? Are you
Yes.
hostile because someone does not share your same viewpoints?
Mm-hmm.
Better self regulation, understanding that you're upset, but also understanding that unfortunately in today's society, we live in an algorithm of our own pain and our own beliefs.
Mm.
So, what you feel like is so true in your world, someone else has an algorithm that has maybe economic fears are so true in their world.
Yes.
So, you really do have to understand within a workplace, everyone is facing maybe different pain points. And so, thinking
Mm-hmm.
about that, enhancing your social skills, understanding that leveraging emotional intelligence to say, okay, I still need this job. I still need to be in this workplace. How do I
Yes.
allow for me to function? Where do I find a commonality with this person so that we can function within the work environment?
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I think is using emotional intelligence to really set up boundaries. Like, hey, this is a topic I cannot discuss with you in a work environment because I think
Yes.
this is a much more emotionally charged than just you believe in this and I believe in this. I think
Mm-hmm.
this feels intimately personal, I think, for a lot of folks.
Yes.
So that's where you have to really leverage that. I think that emotional intelligence at work. But this is a more challenging one than I think we've seen in historical kind of overlaps with work and politics.
I think that's right. I mean, do you then advocate that people don't discuss this topic at all? You mentioned boundaries. Would you say that in most workplaces, people are better off staying away from politics in this kind of charged environment?
So here's what's interesting about even if you look at the way kind of the voting numbers went, a lot of it
Hmm.
went along not just ethnicity, but it went along economic lines. So there's
Yes.
actually a chance that the people you work with who have your similar economic situation share some of your political beliefs.
Hmm.
So there are times when you have people to commiserate with at work. But in the same breath, I think you have to really balance that with how much is this impacting me actually being able to work, get my
Mm.
work done. And so I think that's where I even lean back into the emotional intelligence of know who you can discuss things and who you can't. Because you also don't
Yes.
want to put yourself in a situation where someone else says, I feel harassed, I feel discriminated against because this person is
Hmm.
attacking my political beliefs.
Yes.
Because the thing people forget about diversity, equity, inclusion is it goes both ways, whether you align with
Mm.
someone or not. And it is painful to say that at times, but it's true. Like part of building
Yeah.
an inclusive working environment is understanding that I am fully not aligned with you, but there's a space in which we have to operate together.
Yes.
So I think you have to really use a little guidance and wisdom to be careful how you navigate some of those political conversations. But you are also not, you can also be in a space where you don't allow room for hate. And one of the things I really recommend to clients when you have an issue at work and someone says something that you vehemently disagree with, you can say, I am completely unaligned. So let's move on
Mm.
to the next topic. And just to
Yes.
say I'm completely unaligned is like I do not agree with you. I want to make that firm, but
Yes.
without making it something where you can do this back and forth with someone. Because is
That's
that
right.
even worth your energy?
Yeah, you're not accusing the person of being dumb or ignorant or that kind of thing. You're just saying we don't agree and
Yes.
we need to move on. We need to go and talk
Right.
about something else, or maybe we go talk about our work instead, rather than politics. I think that's really good advice. What
Mhm.
also do you consider to be the role of leaders in this environment? Like how can they model emotional intelligence and boundaries that are respected?
I think leaders also tread a thin line here because, again, there's the grief of some human rights that feel like they're
Mhm.
lost, but then there's also workplaces that benefit economically from this decision, and there's
Mm,
workplaces that are negatively impacted. So I think leaders have to, and this goes to always building an inclusive cultures. What are your core values as an organization? So one, reinforce your core values as an organization, but
mhm.
two, also acknowledge that I think leaders can't just pretend like nothing's happening. I think similar to what we experienced in that period of 2016 and 2020, where there was a lot of divisiveness politically,
Mhm.
I think you have to acknowledge that, hey, we understand this is a tough time for many and that many were not aligned on this decision. Here
Yes.
at work, our alignment is on these core values. So here's how we treat
Mhm.
one another. Here's how we engage with one another. I think as
Yes.
leaders, you have to speak to it, but you also have to kind of say, we are humans and we treat each other a very specific way.
Mhm.
Because politics, values and beliefs, yes, we can have those, but how do we treat each other in this place of work so that one, we're aligned on a goal, but also that people feel a sense of belonging here? Because if you start creating a workplace that leans so far in one direction, you alienate belonging and your performance and your productivity goes down as well.
Yeah. And I think that is so important to communicate that clearly.
Yes.
And we know that sometimes people stay away from things that they find uncomfortable. They're not sure they're going to say the right thing. They don't want to get in trouble.
Right.
But it is so important to say these are the values that we hold as an organization, as a team, and this is the way that we are going to tackle this situation, rather than avoiding it until it kind of blows up for some of the team, right?
I think so. I mean, no one wants to be in that uncomfortable. Like you don't want to be in that. It's an uncomfortable
No.
conversation. But I think you stand in the headwinds of that. You really align to like, hey, we do not treat each other a certain way,
Mm,
or here's where our healthcare benefits will stay to the best of our ability. You
okay.
answer questions, you listen to your
Yes.
employees, but you also acknowledge that I think there are times when people feel like employers are all powerful. And I think there's
Mm,
also moments you have to acknowledge I operate under an umbrella of restrictions and I operate under the same political landscape. So within this organization, what we can control, here's our policies and beliefs and things like
okay.
that. So
Okay.
I think you have to set that difference as well. Like um, we spend so much time at work. I think there are times we forget that there's only so much control an employer has within your day-to-day life in certain ways. So,
Yes. It's true. And I think, especially, when you think about the relationships of the people you work with, because you're spending so much time with them, people have their work wives and work husbands, and, some of your lifelong friends can be from people that you work with because you're going through so many things together. And I think that, one part that is useful is remembering your boundaries. You are at work, and balancing that with making sure that you have social support to help you
right,
handle grief if you're grieving, or whatever the emotions are that you might be experiencing, but figuring out where those boundaries are, and when to do that. Yeah.
absolutely. It's not easy, but
Yeah.
yes, it's how
It's
you're
not
kind of
easy.
moving
Sometimes those
forward.
lines get blurred.
It does.
Yeah. Tell me what you have discovered in your work about how workplaces can impact mental health for better or for worse.
Yeah, I think we definitely underestimate how much time we spend at work, right?
Mm,
Especially now in a digital landscape, we
yes.
spend a lot of time at work and we spend a lot of mental energy outside of our 8, 9 hours of work. You're
Mm,
thinking about it. You're kind of,
yes.
what do I have to do tomorrow? So it takes up a lot of mental energy. And then the other thing that I've seen also really impact mental health recently is this remote work environment as well. Some people thrive in it. Some people find it really isolating and lonely. So it's this interesting kind of mix with mental health.
Hmm.
One of the things that I think is the greatest power that employers have is creating a sense of belonging at work. You are there 8 or 9 hours, and whether that's in the digital landscape or whether you're in person, creating a sense of belonging. And there's a couple tools that you can do to kind of build the sense of belonging and
Mhm.
protect mental health. So, number one is listen to your employees. Like, do surveys, understand what they actually need and support. I worked with a client and they were really struggling with kind of, they felt like a mental health issue within their employees because they had a lot of frustrations around, I wouldn't say benefits, but how time was being allocated. And one
Okay.
of the number one things that was happening was they thought the best team building activities were to do like evening sessions. They're like, everyone's like upset about this issue. So we're going to do evening time building, team building.
Oh, interesting.
And they thought that, oh, well, maybe some people don't have kids. We understand. Like they were trying to think what was best for them. And I don't think they actually listened to their employees because the employees
Yeah.
were saying, we can give you no more time. Like an after
Yes.
work team building means I have to pay for extended daycare, means my dog isn't getting let out at home. It means I
Mhm.
couldn't take another minute here and you added on 2 hours of me in an environment where I'm drinking, honestly, or you're
Yes.
encouraging drinking. And so I think sometimes employers have to really think like, what's the mission? What work do we need to achieve? But how do we
Mm.
create a sense of belonging where why we're here, people are having the absolute best experience and operating at their best level to kind of function.
Yes.
I think another thing that affects mental health more than people realize is fair promotional practices. So
Mm.
I've worked with clients who say things like, we have one guy at work who's or one person at work who's our top referral, and they refer some of the best employees to us. And in that moment, what you've done is tell me you have a clique or a social circle because this one individual and their social network is your highest contributor. So you've already
Yes.
kind of created a group of people that our best employees come from this person. So now you're creating a tension and a lack of belonging and a
Mm.
stress. So really think about how you talk about performance reports. Are they even across the board? Your hiring practices across the board, how you discipline within work if an issue comes up, how you manage rewarding employees. I think a lot of that plagues in mental
Yes.
health because everyone wants to hear, I'm doing a good job, or how can I do better? Like you want to figure out how
Yes.
to be successful at something you're investing time in. And I think a lot of those are simple things that really do plague mental health of employees. Uh,
Mhm.
and everyone says work life balance, but that is a hard thing to unravel, and everyone has what that means personally to them.
Yes,
But
it's
there's
so
certain
different for
things that
everyone.
work
Mhm.
can do. Right. It's very different.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think the example that you used of, this is where the top referrals come from, to dig into that and see why that has now become the narrative, like, you really need to look at some of your biases too, right?
Yeah.
Why are you trusting this person to hire for the whole team or to find everyone for the whole team? And then what does that change about the environment that is maybe not beneficial for everyone else? Because on the surface, it sounds like a positive thing. You have this great referral source, people, it's all worked out really well. But until you dig a little bit deeper and see why that has been the case, why that has become the default, I think that you could be overlooking some really key shifts that are happening in your team. Yeah,
Absolutely, and bias is hard. Bias is
it is
so
hard.
tricky, especially in performance-based environments, because
Yeah.
they'll say, "This is our top salesperson." And a lot of times you can't always pinpoint why that person is your top salesperson. So I've
Mm,
heard so much when hiring, they're like, "We love this person. We want 10 more of them." And I'm like, or perhaps they have just found a way to be a chameleon for a certain amount of your employers. And so it's nothing about them, it's that they adapt themselves to fit. You're like, they're trying to pinpoint what that specific thing is about that person, but also understanding that they are successful with a percentage of your clients. So in order to
yes.
grow your business, you have to get a diverse perspective of people who will also perform with other percentages of your clients. And I think
Yes.
that's hard. People want the quick fix of like, hire more of this or more of this person. Or I think, and I'll even hear blanket statements where like, oh, moms don't do great in these roles. And I'm like, well,
Mm,
how many moms have you had in that role? And have you ever found out why moms are
yes.
not successful in that role? And I think
Well,
that's where I think some of the work stops is they don't ask the further questions about why.
yes. Well, and it makes me think back to the example about the evening activities, right? What are you
Yes.
asking of people? Are you considerate of their different lifestyles that everyone has? Because to your point,
Mhm.
that's not something, oh, easily, off the cuff, you can stay hours late at work or to do some, kind of forced fun, right? You need
Right.
to have that organized and be considerate. And if people, even if you don't have necessarily like obligations, you may not have that mental space to spend any more time, working. Well, and so you need that time and need to have that respected, or at least have people to be able to have their input heard, and considered
Absolutely.
before those decisions are made. Yes.
And
Yeah.
I think there's a lack of, a lot of times we think about our own employees, but I also
Hmm.
think the companies don't even consider who their consumer is and who their clients are. Because on
Mm.
the other side of that client is someone who wants to get home and let their dog out. On the other,
Yeah.
there's other, so a lot of times I think we force a cultural structure of overworking and
Mm.
over, when on both sides they
Mm.
would be more than happy to do something in the middle of the day for 15 minutes. Or, I think
Yes.
um, we hold on to old beliefs about work, but also we
Hmm.
forget that everyone's human. Everyone has commitments and life things that they want to do outside of this space. So how do we
Yes.
create work culture across client and client, consumer, and employer that allows for everyone to have a little bit of better work experience in regards to mental health too?
Yes. Yes, Bianca, it makes me think of how I always cringe when someone's like, "We're a big family," and
But
it's
no,
your workplace, but it's not. It's okay. It's a
no,
company.
it's
I
okay.
don't get paid to hang out with my family, but I do
No,
get paid to do a job, right? And so I think that trying to also force that kind of environment, then it can lead to expecting people to work late, expecting people to always be available, because if we're a family, we're doing this for each other. And I think that people now are able to see through that a lot more, and can definitely build up some resentment if they're feeling that they're being taken advantage of, kind of with that narrative of we're a big family here.
it's like number
You
one red
mentioned, oh
flag.
yes,
Don't do family. When
it
you're
is a
family, I'm
huge
like,
red flag.
red flag, you do things for free for your family. It's not an
Yes,
overlap.
it's not. It
Mhm.
should not be. And it's okay to, of course, have close
It's okay.
relationships. I hope that you enjoy the people that you work with, and it's not a family. It's a different environment, and that's okay. You
Agreed.
mentioned before that some of the benefits of having diverse staff. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Like, what are the benefits for an organization to having different, like, points of view, different experience?
So one of the things I really focus on in my work is really tying like how diverse experiences really do drive revenue and how
Mm,
having diversity within your organization drives revenue. So one of the biggest pieces about having diverse employees is it is reflective of your consumer base in many ways. So if you are trying to reach a consumer, if you are, even if you're in healthcare, you really want to make sure that the people that work for your organization are reflective of the community that they're
mm,
speaking to. And
mhm.
so that's the number one way. The other thing is diversity. And I mean diversity not just in ethnicity, I mean different age and generational experiences.
Mm.
I think different life experiences. When I hear that we hire from this one college, I'm like, don't do that, because now you have a very set cultural experience from this
Yes,
college
very narrow.
that is
Yes.
limiting kind of your perspective when you're working. The
Hmm.
most innovative companies are the most diverse companies. When you compare, even when they look at the Nasdaq and Fortune 500, and they see companies that had higher diversity in their organizations had better performing stock.
Mm.
And I think part of that is it feeds innovation. If we are all saying the exact same thing to each other, and selfishly, would it be really fun to work on a team of all Black women and do a project? Absolutely. But does that mean that we are all are we bringing enough diversity of ideas to the table?
Mm.
Or do we have varied
Yes,
enough experiences in our life? And you can all be one ethnicity and still have very different backgrounds and
that's
experiences.
true.
But you really have to be careful about thinking about, hey, who are we bringing to the table in different voices? The other thing I think is, if you look at the census results,
Mhm,
America will be, no matter how we elect, no matter how we vote, the reality of it, America will be a majority minority nation
mhm.
by like 2045, 2050. So the idea that you can limit kind of who you hire and still think you'll be successful in the future is not sustainable. The other thing I think that companies forget when it comes to diversity is culture plays such a big role in how we as consumers buy something. So
Mm.
you can geographic culture really matters.
Yes.
It's so funny when I'm working with clients and they're in the West Coast.
Mhm.
West Coast has a very specific mindset about certain things, and it's interesting to
It's
listen to
true.
them in a marketing perspective. And if you ask someone in the West Coast, and I'm like, oh, we're going after a client who's median income is $100,000 a year, who owns a truck, like you're kind of limiting. That
Hmm.
person looks very different in California than in Oklahoma, where $100,000 you have a
Goes a
lot
long
of
way.
disposable income, right?
Yes.
You're doing just
Hmm.
fine on that truck payment.
Yes.
But if you live in San Diego on that budget, you're looking
Yeah.
very different. So I
You might
think
be
that's
hurting.
where
Yeah.
you're hurting. So I think we have to
Yeah.
bring diverse perspectives to work, but also you have to hire people that think outside of just their sphere of kind of
Mm.
existence.
Yeah. I appreciate you widening the discussion around culture to some things that I think we don't always give as much weight to. I think that one other thing, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it, is
Mhm.
you need to have a team with diverse perspectives, and you need to have enough people in leadership or decision making roles also, right? You can't just have a team of people where you're still answering to a person who is going to make the final decision and maybe is not reflecting that diversity of thought. How do you coach people into maybe relinquishing some of that power sometimes, or highlighting other people and making space for them?
I think one of the things I encourage is a growth mindset. So
Mhm.
if you would never eat the same meal every single day and do the exact same workout. Like you would diversify it. And so
Yes.
the same thing goes for any mental or organization. You have
Mm.
to have a diversity of sources of knowledge and resources and mindset. That's how innovation happens. So I think
Mhm.
whenever I talk to leaders and I'm really talking about where do you want to see growth, one of the things that I find across all leadership is they speak in data. So first,
Mm.
really aligning on data, like this percentage of your consumers fit in Gen Z. When is the last time you spoke to anyone in Gen Z within your organization? Like, when is the last time you brought that person up and said, "Hey, what are you
Yes.
seeing?" Let's say
Mm.
your number one customer is women who live in the Midwest. When is the last time anyone on your team represented that group or spoke to that group or
Mm,
understood
interesting.
enough about that group?
Mhm.
And so I think and as unfortunate as to say, but when you tie it back to revenue and money, especially in leadership, it's like you are missing an opportunity because you genuinely do not understand this demographic of people that are your consumer. The other
Yes.
piece is you don't understand this demographic of consumer that works for you as well. So they're within your
Mm.
own organization, you have resources with them. But again, you value, I think it is an inherent human belief because we are just biased. We seek similarities to ourselves.
Yes.
So when they're hiring, they're like, they remind me of me and I could get a beer with them. And I'm like, you're already in that seat. You're already there.
Yes.
So mentor
Yes.
someone who is different from you. Bring in leadership ideas from someone that's different than you so that you can kind of create an innovative space as well.
Yeah. I think that it is fair to say that data, drives maybe change, and it's fine. I think it's fine to put it in
Yeah.
numbers, because the story backs that up, and it still does
Mhm.
create opportunities for people. I wonder if you've seen people that you've worked with or companies that you've worked with also change their personal lives from the way that they've restructured their work lives.
Yeah, I think one of the cool things to see is, and to quote Michelle Obama, it's also hard to hate up close. So I think sometimes when I get the chance to work with organizations and you're sharing an experience of someone else within their
Mhm.
company, it changes how they move in their own personal lives. We did a
Mm.
really good session on microaggressions, and we were just talking
Okay.
about the differences between microaggressions, and one of the things you can counteract microaggressions is micro affirmation. And so we talked about what
Mm.
that looks like from a leadership perspective to say, like, you hear this constant stereotype or microaggression within your workplace. Here's a microaggression you can do anytime you do a speaking engagement, any or a micro affirmation, anytime you do a
Mhm.
speaking engagement, anytime you come in contact with that employee, to start changing the narrative and voice within your organization, but also in your personal life. Like, think about how you interact with folks, and are you doing
Mhm.
micro affirmations that kind of one signal who you are as a person and your beliefs, and that you are not aligned with some of the aggressions that they're going to hear on a daily basis, but also it also shifts your exposure. When you think about
Yes.
positive things about another human, it shifts your exposure. And this is a simple one, but I tell leaders, read a book. look around you. Do you go to weddings that no everyone looks exactly like you? Do you go to cultural experiences that go to an art museum? Go do
Yes.
something that allows you to just immerse yourself in another culture. Do you only
Mm,
on the weekends barbecue with people who look just like you? You are kind of in an echo chamber of your own ideas. And to be
yeah.
a leader, you cannot do that. You have to, at some point, expand your horizons and think beyond what is your microcosm, especially if you're in
Mhm.
charge of an organization.
So I want to go back to the discussion about microaggressions and microaffirmations. Several weeks ago, I had a guest on, and we talked about workplace microaggressions because it is something that people do experience quite a bit. Sometimes people realize that they haven't spoken up for someone when maybe they should have said something and they're not quite sure how to do that. Tell me about the micro affirmations, which I really do love this so much, and how that can counteract the microaggressions.
So first, I'm sure your guests use the analogy of the mosquito bites and how microaggressions, one you can take, but when you're 20 different bites, it's extreme, it's too much.
Yes.
So I think
Yes.
one is micro affirmations are the balm to that. That's a soothing thing to
Mm.
that as well. But also it allows someone to hold on to something else, right? Instead of one narrative playing in your head, you get another nugget of joy about yourself, something. So
Yes.
one of the first things I say, and I really think it's important that this isn't just at like leadership level. This is
Mhm.
in every day-to-day interaction you're having as an
Mhm.
employer. You leverage it with your kids. I think you leverage it with
Yes.
friends and people around you. And one, be specific and sincere. So I'm like, you seem like a really good person. I think one of the micro, yeah, it's like, okay, great. One of the micro affirmations, like, whenever I see you present in meetings, I'm always so impressed by the impact you have in that room. Like you do a
Mm.
very sincere, specific thing that they
Yes.
can take away. Whenever I see you engage with a client, I always notice how the client is so engaged in everything you're saying. And that is a superpower, like always giving them something tangible. Or I notice that whenever you could be you can use a barista. Every time I see you, I'm so excited because I know I'm getting the absolute best cup of coffee I've ever had. Like things that
Mm.
allow people to say the work I do is valuable, the person I am
Yes.
is valuable. So be
Yes.
sincere in it. I also think we always say, "Oh, good job," and "good job," and "good job." Like really think about a one specific thing. And I even encourage leaders and peers when we're doing sessions in the thing, write down one specific thing you really liked about that presentation. One
Yes.
specific thing, or one specific thing you really liked about an engagement. Someone remember that and tell them. Because actually it's
Mm.
not a challenging thing. In your mind, you're like, oh my gosh, I loved that. But say that to that person. I think we're so much more likely to say the criticism, say the
Uh-huh.
compliment. I think
Yeah.
this
The
even
criticism or
works.
the generic kind of
Mhm.
compliment, right? That's not
Great
as
job.
meaningful.
No. And even if you're on the street, I have someone stop me and just like, "Oh, that outfit that you put together is so stylish." Don't compliment
Mm.
their physical body. Say things like, 'cause people are like, "Oh, you look hot in that outfit." That's not helpful.
No, no,
Like,
no, that's not what
compliment
we mean.
their specific, like, "That jacket and that color looks incredible on you."
Yes.
Those
Yes.
things like, that is a balm to mental health when you get that.
Mm.
I'm saying balm is BALM, like, that's soothing to mental health when you have those moments.
Yes.
The other thing
Yes.
is mirror the language they use about themselves. So mirror their
Hmm.
identity and how they talk about themselves. I think sometimes when we compliment, someone has told you like um, how they refer to themselves. So mirror that terms. Um, I think if they're referencing like I'm a black woman, use that term. If they say African American, they use the
Yes.
term. If they discuss being in the LGBTQ plus community, whatever term they're using to describe
Mhm.
themselves, if you want to speak to something, use that exact term because you have a shared language. And so they one know they're heard, but two, you're also identifying them in a way that aligns with how they see themselves. I wouldn't do this
Mhm.
in every scenario, but I think there's times when make sure you're aligning to their actual identity, especially when it comes to gender. Like respect their gender, echo how they pronunciate their name,
Yes.
things that really define who they are as a person.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, I think taking that beat to
yeah,
find out who that person is, and if you ask how to pronounce someone's name, listening to their
listen.
response, right? Listening, not just asking the question and then moving on, right? And trying to
Mhm.
it's part of seeing the value of the individual, when you're doing that, much like the compliments and, like, making them very
Yes.
specific. You're seeing their actual value. Mhm.
And be inclusive. Pick someone that is not, like, don't it's easy for me to grow up and compliment women who look like me, and I'm like, "Oh,
Yes.
girl, you're wearing that dress." Like, like, compliment make this is a good way to exercise that muscle of being more
Mm,
inclusive and connecting with others, especially in the
yes.
workplace. Because you could be someone you've never heard of, and you're like, "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I overheard you discussing something the other day, and I just wanted to say I was so impressed with the facts and data that you will use to align it," like whatever you want to do, but give them that credit because a random
Mm,
compliment in a workplace makes you feel seen. It really does. It makes you feel seen.
yes.
It makes people feel like their work is being acknowledged, and then make it a habit. As corny as it
Mhm.
sounds, say, I'm going to do 4 micro affirmations a day for someone else. And then your own negative voice in your head dials down because you don't think the first thing about
Yes.
yourself. It changes the narrative in your head as well.
Yeah, I think it's such a good point, because now you're looking at the world around you and looking for the good, and looking
Yes.
for the beautiful and all of that. And I think that does make us kind of walk through the world a little bit differently when we know that there is beauty to be found or appreciation to be shared. I wonder, like Bianca, if you can tell me why you think that people don't do that as much. I think a lot of times people think positive things, and don't share them. Do you have any insight on that?
I think, it's funny. I was talking to I have my therapist, and we were talking about this one time, and
Hmm.
what she said was, a lot of people, it's the negative voice in your head is louder. So in order for you, and we are
Mm.
selfish, right? We are so self-focused. So our selfish self are we're not you're so not narcissist, but you're so self-consumed
Mm.
that you forget that if you step away from that, you're going to be okay. Like you think that I need to think, and am I doing this wrong? And
Yes.
you're so self-conscious. But what if instead of hyper focusing on that, you thought outwards? And I think that's what it is. I think in a lot of cases, you're
Mm.
hyper focused, not even that you're a narcissist, but you're like, oh, I messed up. I did that wrong. I should have done this better. I should have said that. And one of the things that I've noticed is if you think as soon as the compliment comes to you, sell that person.
Yes.
Tell someone something really good about them because it will become a habit. And I also think it does make it where, to your point, it makes it easier. Everything we do is some sort
Mm.
of mental muscle, and in order to make it easier,
Yes.
but start at home. I sometimes think that you don't have to jump straight to work. There's times my husband's sitting on the couch, and
Mhm.
I'm like, I should tell that man how cute he is, and then I don't say it because I'm like, but imagine how good it feels when you turn to someone and be like, "You are so handsome,"
Yes.
to your spouse. Like, imagine how
And,
good
out
that
of the
feels.
blue as
Out
well.
of the blue.
Yeah.
Like, I was just looking
You
at you
know
and you're gorgeous.
when you were using the term of it being a balm to the microaggressions, it makes me think of, as far as in parenting, how often I am building up my child, saying wonderful things because I know that he might hear something out in the world that is not as positive. And so again, we're trying to shore them up a little bit with the foundation that you know all these wonderful things about you. You hear it all the time and you believe it. And I really appreciate the idea of, you know, genuinely and organically bringing that into our day-to-day lives with everyone, because we could all use that sometimes, not just the kids that we think this is important for us to put them out in the world, because we're all going out in the world, and it's nice to hear those positive things about ourselves.
Especially now, to go to the question at the beginning of our conversation about the election
Yeah.
and where we are now.
Mhm.
People can really use that. I think right now is a good time to
Yes.
remind someone that I see value in who you are and how you identify. I see value in things that are important to you as well. And I think
Mhm.
highlighting those things at this very moment is another way to soothe some of the grief or the tensions as well in that, right? Like
Yes.
uplifting. There's something to be
Mhm.
said about that because it is, and it's almost healing to yourself where you're in your head like, what's going to happen? And you have
It
fear and anxiety
is.
about something and
Mhm.
stepping out of that just a little bit to remember you are still a human that has absolutely 100% control in how you go out into this world and how you treat people. So,
Mhm. Yes, and it can set off a beautiful chain reaction too, right? You get a nice compliment from someone, maybe you feel more comfortable saying something nice to someone else because you know how great it made you feel. And so I think
Yeah.
it can be a very powerful thing to get into that habit.
Yeah, do that instead of the whole pay it forward at Starbucks. Like, do that. Like, go out and tell someone. Instead of, like, you're in line and you're all confused and the order's going funny with the money, and I'm just like, just tell someone. Like, do that. Do the
Yes.
low version, the low budget version of that. So,
Yeah, no, I think it's such a powerful thing to change our mindsets, about how we
mhm.
can look for the wonderful positive things in each other. Um, so I wanted to ask you, kind of going back a little bit about the changes companies can make. You talk about the importance of emotional intelligence and having boundaries. Are there some mistakes that you see companies making when they're trying to have a more inclusive culture? And how what are the kind of suggestions that you make for companies?
I think one things companies do is not over aspirational, but they don't acknowledge that there's only so much they can control, right? Within the sphere of what they do.
Mm.
So they say that they can be everything to everyone. So they're like, we have a really open, like, dress policy. Come as you are. But the
Mhm.
reality is, no, you don't. You have to wear shoes. You know what I mean? Like, so I think sometimes companies get so aspirational in what they're doing or so restrictive
Interesting.
that it becomes unhelpful, right? So I think
Yes.
you create, like, within, and I go back to that core values or your beliefs of the company. Within, when you hire someone, one, connect them with an ally at work. Say, hey, this person is
Mm.
has been successful here, is happy here. Let's connect with someone who can, one, help you navigate the workplace. So they immediately have someone that they can align with and have a sense of belongings. I think a lot of times they give them someone in HR and they give them someone who's overworked and they're like, hey, help someone out. Get someone
Who
who
doesn't have time
genuinely
to show them
who
the
doesn't
ropes.
have time. So then they resent that person. Like, find someone in the organization,
Mm.
and it doesn't even have to be someone in that same department. I think that's another thing. There's
Yeah.
your training partner, and then there's your ally.
Mhm.
Find someone who's not even in the same
Yes.
department who can be your ally, who can say, hey, to navigate this, think about, this. Or I was at a session and this company talked about how inclusive they are and all this stuff. And no one had even told this lady where the bathroom was on her first day. Like, it was just little things where it's like, get an ally who can walk you through and be like, "Hey, here's where
Yes.
this is. Here's where to go to
Yes.
lunch in the area." Little things that just make a work
Mhm.
day a little more stressful. The other thing I think is,
Yes.
ensuring leaders are not showing favoritism. This is hard. It's like asking a parent who has
It is
multiple
hard.
kids. You're like, "Oh, I have no favorite kids." There's some, you have alignment more with one over the other in some capacity, right?
Mhm.
So I think leaders showing favoritism is hard because that the organizations begin to mimic that person because they think that person is the beacon
Yes.
of success. But the issue may also
Mhm.
be that person just reminds them of their kid. It doesn't mean that necessarily, or it reminds them of their dad or their, you know what I mean? Like, there could be no
Yes.
professional rhyme or reason to why that person has favoritism. So leaders really have to look at how they're expressing favoritism, who they uplift when they're in
Mm.
a meeting or a group. That, because it, you are telling person
Yes.
model after this person's behavior. So I think as leaders, we have to be really conscious of how we navigate that in the workplace as well. I think the
Mhm.
other thing that we are not open as much on is align on what the mission of the workplace is. Like, our mission of the workplace, have a mission statement and go back to that when you are talking to the group. Like, our mission is to do that. So within our mission as an organization, how do we create an inclusive and belonging environment for
Mhm.
everyone who works here? I think I see a lot of difference with younger generations expecting work to adapt to them, and yes,
Mm.
you have the ability to change certain things in your workplace. But I also think we don't do a good enough job right in that onboarding period of like, hey, these are kind of the things that have to stay as they are. But here
Yes.
is
These are
areas where
the
we can get
expectations.
feedback
Yes.
and make shifts. And here's areas where we want to hear your voice.
Yes.
You have to give people parameters to kind of know how to be successful and how to build belonging and culture.
Yes.
People want structure. It doesn't mean they want
Mhm.
biases, but they want structure. So, like, here's the rules of the road. Everyone plays by these rules, and here's how you're successful within that too.
I think that is key, especially given that There may be some people who are new to the workforce who have never been in an office environment full time, if at all, right? And so if the organization is not saying this is how this workplace operates, how are people going to know? And I think communicating those and not expecting that people will just know, because we're all coming
Yeah.
from such different experiences of work and what that looks like.
And to go back to that culture, people have very different cultures in how you define work, how
Yes.
you define terms. So clarity, I think, is really important. And even little things like we had someone say, "Hey, we have a really casual workplace," and we had a young employee who came in, and every day she'd come in, her slippers would be under the desk. She'd put on her slippers and then
Oh no.
walk around the office in like bunny slippers. And people are laughing at her and kind of like, oh my God, did she do that? And they're doing all this
Yeah.
snide talking. And not one person went
Mm.
over and said, hey,
Said anything.
this is like, let me just explain more. By comfort, here's kind of the parameters of what comfort
Yes.
is. And then if you want to have them at your desk because your feet are cold, you can, but you can't walk around and get coffee.
Uh-huh.
You kind of, here's the thing.
Yes.
Rather than that, they took an incredibly and talented employee who knew a lot about the role, who was newly educated in an innovative space, made that person feel insecure that they were left in the organization,
Hmm.
didn't quite understand, rather than just someone being an ally and be like, hey, maybe not this.
Yes.
So I think that's the other thing at work is
Mhm.
allyship with between employees to also
Yes.
say, here's how you can be really successful because now her image that the company has of her is this young person in bunny slippers rather than the super intelligent, innovative, dynamic person that she is. So I think that's what's also hard is
Yeah.
balancing some of that as you meld in a profession, you're trying to build culture and belonging as well.
Mhm. Well, and I think, learning how to have those conversations that might be a little uncomfortable, but
Yes.
in the long run, I'm sure that person would be pretty appreciative. And to go back to what really drives change a lot of times in organizations is that's you've lost this talented, innovative person. Or even if you haven't lost them, I imagine that sometimes, you see people retreat and kind of shrink a
Yeah.
little bit when they know that they're not being included in the environment, right? When they know that people are talking about them, so you're not going to get
Right.
your best work out of them anyway.
And I think also we don't acknowledge different working styles enough in working environments. Not
Hmm.
everyone is a loud personality. Some people are going to be very quiet but that quiet person, still waters move deep, right? That person is on their game. They know what happened. They have
Mm.
innovative ideas. So I think it's also important to make sure other voices are heard. So I really think at work, you have to work on as leaders, as peers, amplifying someone's voice. So if you are a peer of someone who you know is a really great worker in that meeting, say, Michael, every time I have a chance to engage with Michael, this person has really innovative ideas. Michael, I want to just give you the room for a
Yes.
second. Do you mind sharing? Or you see them madly taking notes, and you're like, I feel like I've seen you deep and attentive this whole thing. We're going to have a moment of like transparency. How do you feel about this initial rollout? What are changes you would make? So
Yes. Hmm.
opening the door, but also acknowledging they may not just be like, this is the best idea ever, and I'm fully aligned with it. So I think
Yes.
amplifying voices at
Yes.
work is another really great way to build a culture
Hmm.
that is more successful, that is more productive, and people feel like a sense of belonging as well.
Yes, and I think that that also goes back to that emotional intelligence, noticing when there's people who are quiet, but that one on one maybe they've shared more, and being aware of how that benefits everyone for that person to also speak up to the group, if they feel comfortable, or for you to create a space for them to share their ideas, and then being open to the feedback. I think sometimes, to your point about different styles in the workplace, some supervisors, some leaders may imagine, well, if they had something to say, they would have said something. We said, "Does anyone have anything to say?" And that's not always enough,
No.
depending on the way that, people, like, feel comfortable expressing themselves.
And I think we talked about mental health. This has been especially challenging in the remote environment because a lot of times in the remote
Yes.
environment, people are multitasking. And I'm all for remote work. It's something I do, but I think you also have to acknowledge within remote
Mhm.
work, you have to engage people differently because you have 20 faces blinking at you on the screen. And if you ask, like, hey, does anyone
Yes.
want to talk? They've got to come off mute. They feel like giving alternate spaces like, hey, We have a box where if
Mhm.
you wanna just share feedback and ideas, not a comment section, we have a way to
Yes.
share feedback ideas. Or we're gonna pause for a second, everyone kinda go around and to give spaces where you can engage with people and keep people
Mhm.
engaged in digital places. Because I think that's where you miss a lot of the true potential of talent is when you're in a digital space where they can easily hide or they can easily be uncomfortable,
Yes.
or there's a dominant talker in a digital space that kind of limits everyone's
Mhm.
engagement.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's such good advice, Bianca, and really, I appreciate all of the tips that we can use, right now. As soon as you hear them, I think to just not only change our work environments, change the way that we can appear in our workplace, and also just in our lives in general. So, thank you so much,
Oh,
Bianca. If people would like to know more about what you're working on, how can they get in touch with you?
My website is conveyculture.com, and then you can follow along with some of our journeys, both in Japan and then also with the work I do at Bianca Convey Culture on Instagram. And then I'm also on LinkedIn under Bianca Reed. So they can find me in any of those
Yes.
wonderful places.
Wonderful. Yes, Bianca is in Japan up very early to talk to us today. So thank you for that as well and for a great conversation.
Oh, happy to be here. You are definitely worth getting up early for. So thank you.
Oh, that felt like a genuine compliment.
Hey, why miss it? I have boundaries. I'd have been like, no, not for this person, but for you, yes.
Yep. And I respect boundaries. As a therapist, I respect boundaries wholeheartedly. So thank you. Thank you. That means a lot to me. And for more information on what I'm doing, you can visit my website, Dr. Patrice Lagoy. And I'm also on Instagram and TikTok as Therapy with Dr. Patrice. Thank you so much for joining us today and look forward to you joining the next episode.